I'm wearing it on my favorite show. What are you trying Okay, I'm just expecting the all right, so for the next workshop, we're going to really go pretty deep into client-side programming, which we really haven't done all that much of. In fact, I think that the only client-side programming we've done really has been Game of Life, and I don't think we were using jQuery with that. So let's talk a little bit about what jQuery allows us to do, what the different terminology is. So some things we should really know about at this point is that we have this idea of the document object model, which the way to sort of think about it is that you have this sort of living structure that's sitting there in the browser that can be manipulated, right? So you have this DOM, it's a tree structure. Your client-side code is code that's going to be run in the browser, right? Only two places that you can run the code. Either it's going to be on the server, it's going to be on the browser, and now we're going to end up focusing on the browser. Another term here is going to be selectors. So these selectors that we use, this is sort of a critical part of jQuery. And if you're comfortable with CSS selectors, you'll be comfortable with jQuery selectors because they function exactly the same way. And selectors give you the ability to, what I'm going to call, grab jQuery collections. And that's what we'll end up talking about. So when we end up talking about, when we think about front-end applications, what we're doing is we're building user interfaces, okay? So these are the part of the application that the user is looking at as opposed to code that's written in the back end that's making calls to databases or that's setting up routes or that sort of thing. Someone's looking at the screen and the code that you're going to be writing is going to be code that's going to be manipulated. What happens on the screen are handle events that end up happening on the screen. So now for the first time, we're going to end up getting into user interfaces. And we end up doing this by manipulating the DOM. So again, based on events or what we say is interactivity. So if you end up clicking on something, the DOM changes. We can also say that the DOM changes. I mean, maybe we have a rep socket that's connected to the server. Maybe we're polling the server. Maybe we've got a list of stocks and we want to show the updated prices, right? In that case, there's no real interactivity, but there's some event that we deem is important on the client that's going to then end up manipulating the DOM. So if we think about the difference between the server and the client. So let's say that we had a server, and this is supposed to be a server that's in Norway somewhere. Right, so you have your server that's in Norway, and you end up making a GET request to the server. So you have a client that makes a GET request. We know that maybe what we're doing here is we are just sending back some static HTML file with this GET request, which ends up coming down, obviously, as HTML, which ends up coming down to the client. And what's going to happen is that the browser is going to end up basically reading this file, and it'll go through and read these things line at a time. If it ends up seeing a style sheet, it's going to make another request to end up getting that style sheet. It'll end up getting those styles. If there's a script tag, it'll end up making a request and getting that script tag. So you have this one page that's sitting in the browser, but that browser, even when it's loading, is other requests for other resources that you have on the server. And again, when it ends up asking for the script tag, again, from the server's perspective, maybe we're serving this up through by using the Express static middleware, which is something that we've seen before. So once we end up going to the client, right, any of the front-end JavaScript, by default, it's going to be JavaScript that ends up getting sent to the browser, okay? There's the code that runs, and you also have to make the distinction. I think sometimes when you're running stuff locally, sometimes it gets to be a little bit hazy, where you say like, oh, what is that? You know, that other JS file, you know, was running. Shouldn't that be running on the client too? Well, you know, the code that you end up sending back to the client is going to be run on the client. It has no concept of what the server is. It doesn't know what the hell the server is. I mean, it knows how to make a request to a URL, okay? But there's nothing that the client can go and execute, you know, on the server directly. And there's nothing the server can really directly execute on the client, right? The client makes a request. The server returns HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, okay? So, you know, there's no real, I mean, one thing to sort of realize is that there's no shared functionality, okay? Now, it used to be, if you weren't coding in the JS stack, sometimes it would be a little bit more apparent to you because all of your server-side codes might have a different extension than your client-side code. So in other words, if you were doing, you know, writing an application in Ruby, you know, any of your server-side code would have, you know, RB extensions. And, you know, if it was .NET, it would have to make that, see that pretty easily, okay? But here again, you're looking at JavaScript, and really depends on who it's delivered to. If the JavaScript is delivered to the client, it's going to be running on the client. If you're executing it on the server, it's going to be executed on the server. They're two totally different engines that are running. So we've got this thing that's this server that's sitting there in Norway. We've got all these requests that are, you know, all over the world where people end up making these requests. And what you have is you have issues that end up coming up where you can control your environment on the server, right? You can set up your environment on the server and determine what packages are installed on the server, even what node version you're running on the server. But you can't control the engine that's clients in different browsers. So on the server, we've got Node. And on the client, we've got all these other browsers that people could be using. And let's actually make it a little bit more complicated. Not only can they be using these other browsers, but they can also be viewing them on other devices as well. So, I mean, just to give you an example, and again, this leads up to the sort of, you know, how jQuery came to be such an important library. Different browsers, you know, handle different ways of even getting something as simple as the styles of an element. So, you know, you could have, you know, in some ways, maybe you'd end up getting an element, you'd ask for its computed style, you'd ask for its current style, you'd ask for its runtime style, maybe you'd get the class attributes themselves and you'd end up parsing them. And the bottom line is that really all these things end up being really these different engines that you're writing code for. And that's what ends up becoming tricky. Now, again, there are specifications that are specified with HTML and JavaScript and even CSS, and it's up to the browser companies to implement them the way that they should be implemented. I mean, at some point, they weren't really following any standards at all, which made it really difficult to write JavaScript, and people just didn't want to take the chance on it because things would break in different browsers. Maybe there was only 2 browsers out there, but still your code looked markedly different in each of them. So, you know, this is something that you would end up seeing where you would, you know, have to go in. We know, actually, this is kind of an interesting thing. You know that if you have a object in JavaScript it's perfectly relevant to query properties. You can ask if a property exists, okay? And that property could be a function. And that would tell you if, hey, look, does the DOM element understand computed style, okay? This second if, is actually an error in the slide, okay? That you wouldn't do. You wouldn't actually call the method. Basically, what you're doing here, in asking whether the DOM supports these different things, what you're really doing is you're browser sniffing. You're determining what the browser is, and that's going to determine what code you end up running. So, things that browsers end up doing differently, a lot of different things, okay? They've gotten a lot better. They've gotten a lot more standardized, but there still are things that they do differently, how elements end up getting selected, how to set styles on elements, I guess how they end up implementing various APIs. That's actually totally true. When we talk about APIs, there's HTML5 sort of fell into this category, where HTML5 is just a collection of other APIs. There were drawing APIs, it was local storage APIs, and we sort of lumped this together in HTML5, but some browsers ended up handling them differently. Some browsers didn't end up implementing them at all, okay? So, what APIs, when we say APIs, what we're really talking about is what functionality is available in the browser, okay? At some point, some browsers actually had local storage, some didn't. Some had session storage, some didn't. Some were able to make XML HTTP requests or AJAX requests a certain way. Some ended up making them different ways. And you'd have these branches in the code based on what browsers you were working with. So again, we just say, like everything here. So jQuery kind of rides in here at a time where, it became very difficult to manage your code for different browsers. And so jQuery was created to solve the problem, to basically say, hey, look, write the code in jQuery, okay? Again, the underlying code is all JavaScript. It's all, if the browser, you can't do it, okay? But browsers were implementing things different ways. So in other words, if you went to set a style on something, what jQuery would do is that under the covers, jQuery would do the sniffing for you. jQuery became an abstraction to get to JavaScript. jQuery is not a plugin or anything like that. It's just a JavaScript file. Instead of calling some of the native methods directly to create elements, to create classes, to attach the elements, you would end up using jQuery's methods, and jQuery would know which browsers ended up supporting which methods. So again, like I mentioned, this ended up providing an abstraction. So jQuery ended up coming out in 2006, and it changed things really dramatically because you really could go, if you ended up using jQuery, you didn't have to worry about all these cross-browser concerns. You didn't have to worry about something looking different in Firefox. I guess Chrome wasn't, I don't think it was around yet. But you didn't have to worry about whether it looked different in Opera or whether it looked different in IE, or whether, you get different versions of IE that would, to totally drive you crazy. So it's still used today. A lot of sites, you would end up finding out that you do have this, if you ended up looking, you would find out that, come on in. So you would end up finding out that it's used a lot today. If you looked at source code for a lot of sites, you would see that jQuery was included in the source code. One of the things that was downloaded. So, and this is kind of an interesting thing. I remember interviewing someone who was a senior developer, and we were talking about CoffeeScript. And CoffeeScript is what we would call a transpiler. So CoffeeScript basically allows you to write this very sort of clean looking code where you don't have to worry, a lot of ES6 features that are sort of available now, what would end up happening is that you could compile that or transpile that into JavaScript. And I remember talking to someone on a job interview, and they were trying to convince me that a CoffeeScript compiled things to jQuery. and you know, that's a real confusion. People are like, oh, you do JavaScript? No, I do jQuery. Now, I remember like trying to say, you mean JavaScript? No. Compiles to jQuery. So I mean, you know, there's even confusion about what it actually is. But all it is a single library, okay, that is an abstraction to do very common things, okay, in JavaScript. So here's some examples of all of these are selectors. And this is something that's very important. I'm going to say it to you really a bunch of times. When you end up asking jQuery, so the dollar sign is jQuery. In fact, once you load the jQuery library, if you would do, and it's lowercase j, capital Q, query, and you said jQuery triple equal sign, dollar sign, it would say true. It's just it's the same value, okay? And it's a function. And there's really 4 ways that you use the function. The way it's being used here is as a selector. So if we ended up having, and we could do some demos of this, but if we were writing jQuery and we did $h1, what that would do is it would end up looking for all the H1s on the page, okay? And what it's probably doing under the hood is that there's a native method called document get elements by tag name, in which case it's probably getting the elements by tag name. There's really only 2 ways natively you can get objects in JavaScript. Get element by ID and get elements by tag name. And jQuery is wrapping around that to let you use these CSS selectors. At least that's how they were doing things initially. They're doing things differently now. They might do. But the bottom line is that, and this is really important, when you do $h1, so you might think, well, if you have 5 H1s on the page, $h1 is going to give you a collection of those 5 elements. Yes and no. Okay? What it actually does is that when you end up using the $, the way that I like to say it is that what you're getting is a wrapped set of elements. The object that you use when you use jQuery, you get something back which is wrapping around a collection of elements. That collection might have 1 H1, might have 1,000 H1s, might have 0 H1s. But it's going to be a wrapped set around those elements. And the object that you get back can be chained so you can do things. If you wanted to make all the H1s on the page disappear, you could say $H1 remove. Bang, they're out of the DOM. Okay? So there are built-in ways of iterating over those wrapped sets. Again, I just want to be clear about that. It's like, so what it's sort of, the way to sort of think about it, it's like a collection of DOM elements plus something more. It's a wrapped set of those DOM elements. Okay? So, and again, these are standard, you've seen these before, right? These are sort of standard selectors that you're looking at. So the first one, we're getting all the H1s. The second one, we're getting something by ID. jQuery is kind of interesting. I don't know if this is always the case, but you should never have more than 1 element with the same ID, okay? That's a HTML rule. I think if you have 2 elements, you can test this out pretty easily. If you have 2 elements with the same ID, which you shouldn't have, when you use jQuery, it only gives you the first one. It assumes you only have 1 of them, okay? Just to decide. But here it's getting something by class. Here it's getting something by selector. All of these things are selectors. So if you're good at writing CSS and writing your selectors, it's going to be very easy for you to end up grabbing these things. If you're not, you just have to put a little bit more time into it. So here's another thing. Here's something that you could do with jQuery. When I say that, what you end up getting back is a wrapped set. You know, if this was an array, let's say you thought, hey, look, $.button just gives me an array. Well, obviously, it's not just an array, because an array doesn't have an on method. A jQuery wrap set, which is always what you're going to be working with, okay, has an on. And so what we're able to do here is that we're able to attach events to the DOM. If you remember back in Game of Life, we actually got an element by ID, and we set its on click to some function, okay? Here you're able to do it with jQuery. And you're able to do it by specifying, hey, look, when this button gets clicked on, this is what I want the callback function to be. So this is how you end up wiring up events to jQuery. Let me ask you, I'll throw this question out. What if there's nothing on the page with a class of .btn? What do you think happens? Well, it's going to have nothing to operate on the arm. It's not going to error out. Okay?
Doesn't do anything.
You don't see anything.
You see nothing. You would see no error. A query where you have this this ability to basically chain this jQuery collection. So on click, you're going to end up doing that. I don't know if there's any.
Hey, Eric, does it? Sorry, and this is just conceptual. Like, does it actually return anything, or like, does it ever really capture the stuff, or is it operating like when the function's called or when an event happens? Like,
What do you mean? Are you talking about this like, thing in particular? Or are you talking about using the dollar sign?
Like, let's say I was doing by class name.
Okay.
Like, there's no real way to capture those elements. If, let's say that none of them had IDs, right? And if I just did by class name, like, is it keeping track of that stuff, or is it like it's waiting for events to happen, right?
No. Let's be very clear about that. Okay. Let's not talk about. Are we talking about just selecting, or are we talking about?
Like on this on click, right?
Okay, that's a little bit different. Okay, so that's different. What's happening there is that you have the ability. Okay, the DOM. One of the things you can do with the DOM is you can add event handlers natively to the DOM. And what it is basically the DOM is listening. Okay, you're registering something. You're subscribing to an event. The event that you're subscribing to is the click event. And it's more specific, it's the click event of that button. Okay? That's just the way that JavaScript works. But jQuery gives you a very nice way to do it because you can take your selector again. If there was 50 buttons that were on the page, okay, there would be no easy way to do this with native JavaScript. But jQuery gives you the ability to get these wrap sets back in that you can operate on. I couldn't really see, I knew this is a couple of slides, but you know, so what's happening here, you can hardly see it, but you see that you're dealing with the on method and the parameter that you're passing to it is the click event. So there's a bunch of different events that you could end up working with. You could work with click, mouse down, hover, changes, key press, any sort of user interaction. And you can deal with resizing the browser, really anything that can be captured, you could end up capturing and attaching events to it.
Like, so I couldn't go outside of jQuery capture that. Like I couldn't do like show me all the H1s and then somehow get that stuff out of jQuery into naked JavaScript and then look at it, right? You can't do that, can you?
Yeah, you're using JavaScript, right?
No. What I mean is,
use native JavaScript methods.
Like I've never tried to. I just thought of this. I've never tried to take the stuff. I always do operators. Use jQuery operators for jQuery. Never try to compile a list and then say, okay, what is jQuery returning? You can't do that, right?
No, with jQuery, and you can.
Oh.
What jQuery is returning, the way that you'll see it, what jQuery is returning, it's actually kind of interesting. jQuery actually returns a wrap set. If you actually wanted to get the DOM elements, you wanted the collection of DOM elements, if you take a wrap set in jQuery and you call the .get method on it, turns it into an array of DOM. You're not going to have to do it,
right.
But it does do that.
The entire element.
It'll give you, instead of having, like when I said it's not really an array of DOM elements, it's a wrap set of DOM elements. If you wanted to get it as an array of DOM elements, you could call it get element. And and we'll talk about it, if you iterate over that collection, what you end up getting back when you iterate over that collection is you do get the DOM elements. Okay? So here's an example of actually, how selectors could work and some of this stuff. jQuery, if you look at the documentation, is very good. And if you end up looking at it, you'll see that it's broken down into different categories. So there's a whole section on selectors, there's a section on traversing the DOM, there's a section on manipulating the DOM. It's going to be limited as to how much you're going to end up going into jQuery. I mean, we're going to use jQuery enough so that you know about it, you sort of need to know about it. But the bottom line is, I think when people are, and you'll sort of find this out, when people are writing applications now, a lot of the applications that are written are single-page applications, and jQuery is not the best solution for them. You're going to find that out with this workshop, okay? But again, even in the short period of time that we have here to work on these workshops, you can actually go in and look at the documentation. The documentation is pretty good. So here, here's some HTML, right? Here's an HTML fragment. We've got these, the author profile is wrapping around the author name and the genre and the titles. We can see when we think about these tags, we can think of them in terms of, this being a parent. The parent has these children. Each of these are considered siblings. Each of these are considered siblings. These three are going to be children of this UL tag, right? That's the hierarchy, right? That's the DOM hierarchy. So one of the things that jQuery allows you to do is you could use a selector and you could end up asking for the children. And again, what you get back is another wrapped set, okay? So if we ended up doing this and we said author profile children, we would end up getting back these three elements in a wrapped set, okay? And you can actually take a DOM element if you want to. You could ask for the child nodes. And I think people saw this when they did selector. Sometimes it's a little bit weird the way that child nodes works because the sort of native implementation sometimes counts spaces as child nodes. It's all of a sudden you're like, well, why does it think when I just used the native JavaScript, why does it think that this white space is a node? Well, that's the way that the browser ended up implementing it, okay? But with jQuery knows either what to count or what not to count. So you would end up getting, in terms of children, if you looked at what the length of the children was, you would end up finding that the length of the children was going to be 3. And you can treat, let me also be clear about this, you can treat this wrapped set, when you say wrapped set, it's an array plus. You can treat it as an array. If you did bracket 0 after children, that would give you that H1 element. The element, not a wrapped set, it would give you the element. Okay? So when you end up either iterating or pulling something out of this wrapped set, you get the element back. Okay? I mean, under the hood, it's an element. Okay? The fact that it's a wrapped set allows you to manipulate it a little bit easier. So going a step further here, right? So these would be the children. Okay? So now we can even go a step further. We have a jQuery wrapped set of children, and we specify, hey, look, within these children, okay, I want to run a selector. Okay? What it's basically doing is it's sort of changing the node that it's looking at. Okay? So when you did children, now you have this wrapped set, but you're being more specific. You're saying not all the children. Let me just get the children that have a class of author name. In which case, you would end up getting this element that's here. Right? On the same token, if you went back and you could, and this is all these methods that you're looking at, when you see children, when you see parent, when you see siblings, some of these things you're going to use in the workshop, okay? These are all considered traversing the DOM. Not easy to traverse the DOM with native JavaScript methods, okay? It's not that easy to go from child to parent so easily. Here, you could easily take, again, a jQuery wrapped set, okay? What's interesting is that parent will always give you a wrapped set with a length of 1. right? It's a tree. Not going to have more than one parent in the tree.
Yeah, but what if there's more than one element that has genre as class?
If there was more than one element that had genres as class, I think then you're right. Then it would end up giving you a collection of those parents. I think. It would. It would. But again, assuming we're looking at this fragment, right, this is going to end up giving you one. You could, I think there's also a method to do parents where it could all go up the tree and you could go really as far as you want with it. So another thing, and this you probably are going to be using in the workshop, right? If you end up saying, so here's the parent, right? If we said genre siblings, we said genre siblings, and again, there's no native JavaScript method to find siblings. It's probably going up and looking at the parent node and finding the other children that aren't empty, right? And leaving out the one that you started. So here, you would end up getting the siblings would be a wrap set with these two. Okay? Again, it's important to see that when you end up using jQuery, it's not an array of DOM nodes, okay? It's this wrap set that you can end up manipulating. You keep on chaining things to it. So these would end up being the siblings. So you also have the ability, for instance, to say, hey, look, I want to use a selector. So again, we spoke about this a little bit when we ended up doing the CSS, which is when we have the space, it's a child relationship. Okay? So find me anything, find me all the elements, okay, where I'm a list item and my parent is going to be titles. Okay? And that would end up giving you all three of these list items. Again, the same way that you would end up using it for CSS or using it for a selector. So, for instance, one of the things that you could do is that if you have a wrap set, and we spoke about this, the way that browsers implement CSS differently, one of the things you could do is you could specify, there's a method, and this is, again, I think that this is it's going to be another section under, in the jQuery documentation, but there's a CSS, these are all, obviously, if this just turned an array, returned an array, there's no CSS method on an array. But there's a CSS method on what ends up getting returned from jQuery. On this jQuery wrap set, we could pass in a map of values, and what it's going to end up doing is it's going to set the style color for each of these elements. Again, standard CSS, standard HTML, the jQuery is just wrapping around it. So one of the things that we spoke about is that there is this sort of implicit looping, right? Everyone can sort of see that, right? If I end up grabbing all those list items and I'm changing the, this is boring, it's a boring So if you have this, if you could sort of see it from this slide, where if we ended up, you know, since it's boring, I'm going to go back and over stuff a little. I'm going to go a little slower. I'm going to go a little slower. Because sometimes if you go slower, it's more exciting. So the all complaints. So here, what we're gonna, you know, what I want you to see is that there is an implicit looping, right, where you are looping over all of these list items. You're not manually looping, but internally, when I see the drool come to the side of the mouth. So, you know, this is, and again, the whole idea of this is, again, this idea that you end up having these wrap sets. Again, there's no errors that you would end up getting if, in fact, there was no elements that ended up matching this condition. There's no error, but nothing on your page would change.
What kind of data structure is a wrap set? Is it just an object?
It's an object. Okay. That is iterable. Okay, because JavaScript is kind of, you know, interesting. JavaScript, you can actually set the JavaScript to be iterable. Like if you have properties that are integer values, I didn't have to look this up. It almost becomes iterable from the JavaScript.
So it's one of those array length things?
It's an array length. That's exactly it. Well, not exactly.
Okay.
It is actually. Because if you ended up taking, I actually just did this today. If you ended up, I was going to say array plus, but yeah, it's array like. Because if you ended up taking jQuery wrap set, and you try, I did this morning, you tried to call for each on it, you'd get an error. So it's not actually an array plus, it is array like. But there are a lot of these other methods that are on it.
Is a promise also a wrap set?
I don't know if a promise is a wrap set. I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, a promise is wrapping around some, or, I mean, it's more of a deferred object, it's wrapping around the promise, and it's wrapping around some callbacks and that sort of thing. But I don't know if I would call it a wrap set. Because the reason why I say that is there's nothing really to iterate. Right. You're holding on to a promise. Here, you do have the ability to iterate over it to some degree. I mean, in a promise, there might be a collection inside, but you really don't even have access to it if you're hanging on to it. Here's a little bit different. So if we end up, so we have this implicit looping, okay? So again, we have the ability to go and we can manipulate an object by setting its CSS. On the same token, this is kind of an interesting one. You could also end up getting the title's text property. Now, you can check this out. My understanding on this, there was multiple titles on the page. We could test it. My thought is that you're just getting back one text value. That's my opinion. We can end up checking that out. But the point is that you could also, if you end up putting a value in this text field, you would be actually changing what's inside that tag. Okay? You'd be changing the HTML inside that tag. So, you know, if you end up, again, what we had mentioned before is that you have the ability to select these objects. You could end up getting the children. And the other thing you could do, you could also explicitly loop. So again, you can't do a for each on a jQuery collection, but you can end up doing an each on a jQuery collection. By the way, this was an amazing thing because when jQuery first came out, there was no for each. The only way to loop over something was to do a var, I equals 0, I less than the length. So this was great. And you're like, I mean, today I was really disappointed. I was like, damn, jQuery doesn't have a for each. And then you sort of remember, well, you know, how much easier it made everybody's lives because they didn't have to do that looping. And there was a little bit of sugar on top of the language, but that's one of those things that really makes the programming a lot easier. You have a question?
Yeah, is that $ on the left side?
Purely naming your, you know what, I think sometimes, I haven't seen this, but at least in these slides, it seems to be a convention that your name, because $ is a perfectly legitimate variable, and it must be, because, you know, $ is pointing to the jQuery object, right? It's just an alias for the jQuery object. I haven't seen that too much. I think what, you know, maybe the idea is here, if you're learning jQuery for the first time, maybe you name your variables with a $, so it's a real indication to you that it's a wrap set. That's a very good question.
I used to do that a lot when I had to write 4 different languages.
Right.
So I came from Perl, and PHP, you have to do this.
Right.
So I used to just put $ in front of everything. So that no matter what your problem is, you didn't know what language you're looking at.
Right. No, I haven't seen this.
It's easier for me.
I haven't seen that too much.
I stopped.
So,
Yeah, no problem.
some of our favorite songs here. So there is kind of an interesting thing here. So one of the things that you could end up doing is that if you ended up, by the way, you know, there are different ways that you could end up doing this, but the way that this works is that this says, hey, look, find me this jukebox ID, and then within that, find me the button, okay? And really find me the buttons. And again, you end up getting back this wrap set. You can do this just as easily by doing $pound jukebox space button. You'll get the same collection. This would, to me, would be a little bit weird to do it this way. Now, the thing that we're getting at here, and it's actually important for the workshop, is that you have the ability, obviously, to access the code that's in here. And actually, here's a question for you. What do you expect this to point to within that callback function?
The
The selected element.
The selected element, right? Same as you would have, and we did this before, right? We did this when we were working with the Game of Life, right, on that snowy weekend. And this, jQuery, the function jQuery did not have to write it this way. They could have pointed to whatever they want to point to, but it makes sense if you are clicking on an element, there's something about that element you might be interested in, okay? I mean, maybe not. Maybe the element just does something else, right? Doesn't really, there's no other data that you're passing in there. But you know, they could have wrote it differently. But what they pass it back here, this is a DOM element. Okay. If you wanted to have the power of jQuery, you see how they named the variable there? $ button press. If you wanted to have the power of jQuery, wrap it. At that point, it's a wrap set with the length of 1. And then you can do whatever jQuery you want. That's important, okay? When you're attaching event handlers, what you end up getting back are DOM elements. If you want the power of jQuery on that DOM element, you have to wrap it. They're calling this, or we're calling this casting, okay? We're casting this DOM element as a jQuery object.
It's really the constructor of this, right? Because it's the object, jQuery object.
I don't know. You know, John, it's a good question. The $ has a bunch of different. What the $ really is a function, and depending on what you end up calling it with, you'll end up getting different things back. Now, right now, we've only been using the $. Now we're using the $ two ways. Okay, we're using it as a selector, and we're using it to cast something. Those are two ways that you use the $. We'll look at some other ways that you can do it too. The point that I want to get at here.
But wait, when you pass it this, does that work because this is really the an ID?
All right, now let's be clear. Let's use our words carefully.
Yeah.
Repeat it, what you said again.
What
What you said was when we pass it this, right?
Yeah.
We didn't pass it anything. We didn't pass it anything. Okay? It was passed to us. Okay? What we did is we subscribed to the click event. It's a very, very important point. We subscribe. As far as we're concerned, we think something interesting is going to happen when someone clicks on that button. Okay? The only way to subscribe to it is through the JavaScript native methods. We tell jQuery, hey, look, subscribe to this. When jQuery calls that function back, you can control the context when you call a function back. The context of this, when that function is called back, is the DOM element that it was placed on. So it's not, in this case, it's very important to make that distinction that, you know, we're not passing to this object, okay? And this object's not even being passed to us. The context of this callback function is being set by the jQuery library. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay? Because again, it's a, you know, when you, I think one of the things with, I have to say, one of the things with client side, now you're awake. All right. Now, one of the things with, this is actually kind of critical. I would say this, I used to teach just a jQuery class, and I would tell people, you know what, if you, with jQuery, if you know how to select things, and you know what this points to, you're really about 50% of the way there. I mean, if you really understand what this ends up pointing to in different situations, okay, then they're so critical. And if you don't, it's very, very difficult to write the code.
So in this case, the this is the DOM element. So what's the difference then between using the $jQuery function as a selector and something to cast it? Because you might as well, like, let's say that that button, the total button, had its own ID. Would that be any different than saying button pressed equals $ID total?
I'm not sure I understand.
So that this is a specific DOM element, right?
Right, and one of the things you can do, let's be clear, this, it all depends on what you want to do. Now, if this was the only code that was in here, it didn't make much sense to wrap to this inside the dollars. Okay? If we decided to change the class of that button, if we decided maybe there were some attributes on the button that we wanted to access to the jQuery methods. We decided we wanted to hide the button when someone clicked on it. Then we might want to take advantage of what jQuery has to offer us, in which case we need to wrap that DOM element inside of the dollar sign. If you want to turn an element into a jQuery collection, wrap it with the dollar sign. Make sense?
Yeah.
You still have a question?
I just don't see the difference between casting and select. So right there, we're selecting that element.
Well, so tell me how you would, what code would you write here if you wanted to do something with the button that was inside? What would you do?
I wanted to do something with the button inside.
Yeah.
Something like what?
I don't know. What if there was a, let's say you wanted to make it disappear.
Can you not say right there this dot move?
It's a DOM element. Does the DOM element have a remove method?
Sure. Oh yeah. So it's like, you can go on. I guess I'm still a little confused about casting as opposed to selecting it, right? So it's the same.
I don't have a selector here. I don't have a selector here in my event handler.
But that's the-
Should I select it? Should I say actually, and from in here, but then what do I do? Then I have to write 3 different functions for every one of my buttons?
Well, don't you selecting it by wrapping in the dollar sign?
No, I'm casting it by wrapping in $.
You're selecting, it's already selected with the.
No, I'm attaching event handlers to elements with my selectors. Okay? In my callback, I have a DOM element. If I want my DOM element, if I want to do things with my DOM element, I want to manipulate my DOM element, I've got 2 choices. Either I could use the native JavaScript methods and understand how every different browser handles those different methods, or I can cast it with the dollar sign to get a wrapped set of 1 that I can then manipulate.
But I think,
In terms of the syntax, a selector, you're going to be passing a string, whereas casting, you're passing a DOM element, correct?
That's true, but the point that I'm getting, the point that I'm getting at is that there's no selector you could put in here that's going to make sense. What would your selector be?
I guess it's
Because the on is
it's
just
just a
for
semantic difference in element.
Yeah, all right.
Well, I think the difference is, I mean, if I'm understanding this correctly, the dollar sign function, you can give it either a string that's a selector,
Yeah.
or in this case, you can give it a DOM element, and it responds differently, or you could, I mean, it's still returning.
Look, let's-
it's still returning a wrap. It's still returning a wrap set.
Right. You're
Look.
always
A
keeping
wrap.
Let's do an example, okay? Here. So here, let's say I've brought the jQuery library in here. And my first thing to always do to see if this is working is to say list item. It went away. Okay, they're gone. Now, let's say that I wanted to say list item on click. That's a function in here. Go in here, console.log this. And here's my console. I go over here. This is, believe it or not, a DOM element. Okay, it's an HTML list element. Now, if my goal was to make this list item disappear, how else would I do it? How else would I do it without doing this? What's my selector?
Can you put something within function? Like, would you?
Yeah, would you add a CSS class?
I don't know. I'm just asking the question. If it seems like it's a question of semantics, an alternative to do this.
Well, so I guess what I mean by semantics there is that let's say in your list element,
Yeah.
you had both of them had IDs, explicit IDs.
Yeah. Okay.
And so instead of, so in the one case, you're saying, okay, I'm gonna wrap this unordered list with an event handler upon click. And then that's gonna deliver to me the specific DOM element that I want to then use in jQuery stuff.
Okay.
In the first case, where we just have IDs and we're not worried about the click, we kind of select it by saying ID 1. And then I'm gonna do jQuery stuff with this specific DOM element.
Okay.
In the second way, we say, we don't have IDs, but we are gonna wait for this click element to point out that DOM element that we're looking for. So the second way, when this is delivered, I understand that we're not using jQuery then to select a random DOM element, but we're not, it's just already been selected for us by the click event.
Yeah, but how do we know?
On.
Yeah, a DOM element has been selected, but it's not a jQuery object.
Right. So yeah, so I see, yeah, casting, selecting, we're selecting the object that's been passed to us.
We're wrapping the object that's been passed to us in a jQuery wrapped set with a DOM element. I mean, I could put IDs on here. It doesn't change the equation.
Right.
If I wanted to put I still have to, again, if I want to manipulate that element, it's got to be cast. Again, whether you call it casting, whatever you call it.
You're selecting it and then you cast it implicitly.
No, selecting with a string gives you a wrapped set. If you have a DOM element and you want to turn it into a wrapped set, you wrap it in the $sign. They're really two different things. I mean, I'm sure jQuery under the covers goes and says, hey, look, you're using the $sign. Are you using the $sign on a DOM element? If you're using the $sign on the DOM element, I'm going to give you a jQuery wrapped set with that DOM element. If you pass to jQuery a string, it says I'm going to use whatever I have with my CSS selectors to get back the elements that you're looking for. The reason why I'm just going over it in detail is that it's critical. It's not something that you can really gloss over. You have to do this casting, and you have to understand what the casting does and what the need is for it.
I got a comment. I'm wondering if your understanding of like what's going on within the context of the function. So like where he's calling this and wrapping it in a jQuery object, that method hide is made to jQuery. So you cannot call it on this because this will not look up the prototype chain to find the jQuery object. Now, if you wanted to not wrap this in a jQuery wrapper, the alternative to do that would be to just do this dot remove, which would be the native implementation.
If it's natively implemented.
It is natively. Dot remove is a method that exists in this, well, but by utilizing hide, you need to.
How about this?
You need to wrap it in that.
Yeah, no, I follow what's happening here. I guess the only thing that I was worried about, which I'm not too worried about anymore after this lengthy discussion, is that when you are selecting those objects, you are essentially wrapping them in jQuery methods just by selecting them, right? Because when you select something, it's returning to you this set of DOM elements that are wrapped in jQuery stuff, the jQuery method.
Correct.
So by selecting something, you are then casting the results of that selection fundamentally. So when you say you're going to cast it or you're going to select it, in my mind, they are two sides of the same thing. Because when you select something, you can't select it and then say, no, I don't want it to be jQuery. Or maybe you could. You're always going to select it and then.
No, so let's be clear. Let's be clear about it. You have set that. Okay.
Eric, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
So if I were to say how this was being executed, right? This is an immediately called function, right? So this is gonna load, when your JavaScript loads, it's gonna run, just the way it's presented right now. If I put it in a JS file, right?
Yeah,
I loaded it,
I don't know if I would call it, it's not an iffy, it's a function call.
right, but it's gonna, it'll fire us, right, it's functional. Okay.
Just, yeah, it's a,
So the first part, right, before the on, gives me a collection of elements. The second part.
no, let's be very clear about that. It gives you a jQuery wrap set.
Wrap set, okay. And then the on executes attach or add event listener, right? This is the naked JavaScript version.
Correct.
With that following function on every element in that collection.
That's correct.
And that's it.
That's it. Now, the reason why this was actually brought up on the over here was that, so if we all agree we could end up writing this code to basically wire up all these buttons, right? That sort of makes sense. But what happens later on? Let me actually just see where this was. Oh, we'll come back to this in a second. So one of the things that we've done here, and we haven't done the create yet, but we've done the finding, we've done the casting. We'll do the creating, but there's actually one more way that the $sign could end up getting used. And in fact, I think you probably did it in the workshop. I think you did a $sign document.ready or something along those lines. So we've done some of these already where we could use selectors, we pass it a string, again, we end up getting back a wrapped set. Another way that we could do this is that if we pass it a string with HTML. So again, there's some sniffing that goes on within the jQuery library that says, did you pass me an HTML fragment? And if you pass me an HTML fragment, what it gives you is a wrapped set with that element, okay? It ends up giving that, you would have a wrapped set, okay, of an H1 tag with that text, which by the way, would not be in the DOM, okay? And natively, you could do the same thing with JavaScript. JavaScript gives you the ability to say document create element, okay? But it's a little bit clunky because you can't give it an HTML fragment. You actually have to give it a tag. Create element with the string li, okay? And then you have an li tag and you could end up adding something to it, okay? jQuery says, don't worry about it under the covers. We'll do the same thing, okay? And we'll create that element for you. Right now, it's just sitting there in memory. You're not doing anything with it. You would never have this code on one line would make absolutely no sense because you don't even have a reference to the thing that you just created sitting there in the ether, okay? As opposed to, we could talk about casting. So with casting, usually casting is done in a callback function, okay? Why exactly all that much sense? And same thing here. This is totally going to be redundant. You had a wrap set here, you're just wrapping it again. It's not going to do anything. It's not going to go 2 levels deeper or anything along those lines. Because that's just confusing.
Is that still gonna work?
Yeah. Because I think what happens is that when you use that $sign, it probably goes in and says, hey, look, this is a jQuery, if this is a jQuery object already, I'm done, goodbye, right? In this case, I mean, theoretically, here we're saying this being a DOM element, okay? Let's say this was already pointing to a jQuery wrapped set. You'd end up getting back a jQuery wrapped set. Okay? But this is the whole idea of casting, and I added this in. This wasn't originally in the slides. The other thing you can do with the $sign is you could pass in a function. Okay? When you pass in a function to the $sign, now exactly why they decided to implement this, I don't know. It seems totally different from all the other ways you use the $sign. But if you pass a function to the $sign, it will run when your DOM has finished loading. So you could put JavaScript code really anywhere on your page, and this will end up running when the DOM is there. You don't have to worry about the DOM element being there at the time that you ran it.
Is it pretty like a stack of functions, or you're going?
No, it just does something very simple under the covers. There's a way to specify on the window object that the window has loaded. There's nothing else that's coming
Can
in.
you use it multiple times, or will
Absolutely.
it take the last one?
You could use it multiple times. If you did timeout on the window object, you could only do it once. That's a great point. This you could do multiple times. And it'll just execute one right after the other when the DOM finishes loading. So here's actually the example that I was going to get at before. So if you have this ID with these buttons, let's say we did something like this where we want to basically attach some kind of event. We want to end up playing some song or something, which we're going to do when we end up doing Angular. And we want to do it when this is clicked on. So what happens if we set this up, but later on down the line, we end up adding 2 more buttons? Okay? Becomes a pretty problematic, because when we end up running this code, $sign jukebox 3 buttons. And internally, there's this iteration that happens. jQuery goes in and adds an event handler to each of those buttons. Okay? If we decide to add some more buttons to the list, jQuery doesn't have some memory. It says, oh yeah, by the way back then, there were event handlers attached to this guy's siblings. We're going to attach these 2. Doesn't. Okay? So you would be dead in the water where your first 3 buttons would be working and your last 2 buttons wouldn't. Okay? Again, this is based on the order of that you're attaching these event handlers when you only have 3 buttons within this list or whatever it is. Okay? You end up adding 2 more buttons later on, but you've already added the event handler. Okay? And you added the event handler to those 3 buttons individually. So how do you handle that? Because obviously that's something that you want to avoid. Well, one of the things that you could do here, this is called, this really is being used as event delegation. And the way that it really works underneath the covers is that you're not actually adding the event handler to the buttons themselves. What you're doing is you're adding the event handler to the jukebox. Okay? And internally, when the jukebox gets clicked on, okay, jQuery is listening. What's the selector of the thing that got clicked on within the jukebox? Because that's one thing that you can do with native DOM methods. With native DOM methods, you can find out what elements got clicked on. Okay? So jQuery goes and says, hey, look, the jukebox was clicked on. Was there a button? Was it a button that was clicked on in the jukebox? And it executes that function. So instead of attaching your event directly to the buttons, which you ended up doing over here, right? Instead of adding them to the buttons, because the jukebox choices is a collection of buttons. Instead of adding them to the buttons, jQuery accounts for this by saying, hey, look, go up to a parent element, okay? And give us a selector, okay? If you put in a selector, I'm not going to run this function unless the thing that was clicked on within the jukebox matches that selector. So whether that button was there at the time that this was called, or whether the button comes in later on, this code is still going to work.
This is more efficient, I think, right?
It probably is more efficient. Yeah, I would say it's got fewer event lists. But again, at this stage of the game, we're not thinking about it from an efficiency point of view, but yes, probably is more efficient. But there's no, you still have to, again, if it was the button that you were interested in, you'd have to do it this way.
How does the on handle the button? What does that do there with the button?
Well, if you ask me what the result of this is, I will say that the this inside of this callback function is going to point to the button that was clicked on. Okay? I can tell you what the result is. What I can't tell you, I could guess how jQuery is doing it, but it's not that important. Right? How it ends up implementing it is not too critical. My guess is that there's an event handler on the jukebox and it looks at what got clicked on. The important thing is what you're trying to accomplish by writing this code. What you're trying to accomplish by writing this code is you're saying, hey, look, for all buttons that are in that jukebox now, and any button that might go into that jukebox in the future, I want to add an event handler for it, because when you do your trip planner, okay, you're going to be clicking on something and adding it to your trip, and it's going to go somewhere in the DOM, okay, and you're going to want to have event handlers on it. You're not going to want to have to go up to the parent element and do it this way. When things are being dynamically added to the DOM, okay, this is the way that jQuery solves this problem. Any questions about that?
Button is a selector. Like
Button is a selector, right? So
if you wanted to select a class underneath jukebox, you would just do.
yeah. So I mean, for instance, right? Even here, this we could demo pretty quick too. So that if we had this, inside of this JS bin, let's say that, let's do it here. So let's do this. We'll say $li dot click. And let's say that when we click on this, let's just look at, let's say console.log. And let's say I want to look at the text, not a cast. Then I could look at the text. And if I did that, there is some weird error that's popping up here, and I'm not positive it's in the code. I'm going to reload this. Oh, no, that actually looks right. Yeah, but I thought I was. Okay. It's weird. I cannot get to this top element, and I don't know why. I don't know if I'm just not able to get to it because of this button that's there. Let me just put something in here. Okay, that's a little bit better. I think there's something here that was preventing me from clicking on it. So if I end up doing that, right, I can wrap this and I can end up getting the text. Li, and I'm going to use now the jQuery. I'm going to construct something with jQuery, and I'm going to give it a list item of 3. And I'm going to find my list, okay? And if I have this wrapped set, there's only one unordered list on the page, but I'm going to append to it this list item. You see, you have 1, 2, 3 there now, right? Clear this. 1, 2. Buckle my, right? Now, if I wanted to accomplish this, what I could do, the way that you'd accomplish this is you'd say, hey, look, you know what? Instead of putting this on the list item, okay, let me attach it to the UL, but let me actually tell jQuery. Now, I'm not using the on click here. I think I want to do that. You have to use on, and I could say click. It's got to be a list item. 2, 3. Okay? So that's the difference between those two things. Okay, but again, let's be very clear that it's not the list item, it's an event item that's being passed in that event handler.
Would that not work if you used .click and then passed it li as first?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think you have to use on. I think this is my guess. Maybe it does. I didn't think so. Oh, I didn't mean to have it print out hell. Sorry. Let me clear this. I don't know what it's here. Yeah, here basically, I think it's, from my perspective, it's totally ignoring that li. Not even doing anything with it. It's giving me the whole unordered list. So this has to be on. And I think what ended up probably happening is I think that this might have been added when jQuery first came out. Maybe you didn't have the availability to do this. And if you didn't have the availability if you couldn't do this, what you would have to do, it wouldn't be the end of the world. You'd have to manually handler when you ended up adding the element. You could do that too, right? But this saves you that time.
With the .append, do you need to wrap your list item variable in jQuery, or can you just pass in a straight element?
Well, let me ask you this question. Well, let me rephrase it.
Okay.
Append takes, could you pass a regular DOM element? Maybe, but you could also pass a jQuery collection.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, would it work with a native DOM element? I don't know, you could, maybe it would, I don't know. But usually, you know, the whole point of it is that it's a lot easier to construct elements with jQuery than it is to, I mean, if you wanted to do this with, if you wanted to create this list item.
A string in, just a string instead of the.
That's a good question. So let's say you did this. Yes, it just wraps it as a regular text node.
Instead of RLI being a jQuery.
Yeah.
Just get rid of the $sign in the parentheses.
Oh, that's a good idea.
That's a string.
Let's do that. Yeah, you know something? Wait, so just do a string, right? Why bother wrapping it? You know, this drives me. Okay, so. You know, that's kind of interesting. You know, it's possible that it will work, okay? Because obviously it is working. Which my guess is that if you just send a string in there, it's just gonna wrap it. But again, if the point was, you know, if you wanted to do something with this list item, you know, whatever it was. I mean, I don't know. Maybe you want to take this list item and you want to add some CSS to it to make it red or something. That you couldn't do.
Sure.
So usually when you do this, you might be doing something more with it. For instance, you might end up doing, you know, CSS color red. And this has to be a string.
Like a .html operator as well.
Yeah. So text just gives you, HTML would give you the entire HTML. Yeah, so if I, you know, if you had HTML within this, so you can see that that's the string, but if I said this.html, it would also give me the bold tag too.
And you can set that method.
You can set with it as well. Both the HTML and the text you can both set.
Is there some way to view the live event handlers?
Yes, it's in the Chrome DevTools. It has, like, you can see event handlers as one of the tabs.
Oh, that's right.
And it lists.
Right, and it gives you events that you can toggle.
Exactly.
Right.
Actually, you know what? This way of doing it has to be less efficient. Because every time you click that thing, it's got to reattach. It has to destroy everything and rebuild it.
What method do you think is inefficient?
So the on event, once you compile the on event, the first time you do that, it does the whole page, right?
Wait, you think this is less efficient than?
I think it reruns to add event listeners
No.
every time you click it.
Well, you know what? No, it doesn't.
No.
No, because what it can do internally is it can basically attach itself to the unordered list. And internally, it listens for the unordered list. And when something is clicked on the unordered list, it looks at the item that was clicked on. And if that item was a button, it calls this function with the, in our case, a list item, it calls this function with the context of the list item. It's not hey, look, if it rebuilds everything like that, I would be very surprised, because you wouldn't have to do that.
It doesn't have to reattach event listener all the time.
It's the only event listener, this is very important. The only event listener that jQuery, the only thing that jQuery is listening to is that the unordered list is clicked on. That's all it's listening to. And it's delegating, okay? It's delegating the context of the list item to this event handler.
That's because we did it this way, though. If we did
That's because we did it this way.
If we did the selection on LI, then it would be what Kevin's saying, right?
Well, it's not that it would be less efficient. It would just be that if you added things after the fact,
Each one gets its own event list.
They wouldn't have it.
yeah, then they wouldn't have it.
Unless you manually added it.
I feel like it has to iterate over every element, because you still need the this context to be returned from the add event. Like, you have to redo it every time, right? Because you need.
Why?
Because your function
Why?
has to get executed against this context of the button.
Yeah, but why can't you just, I mean, if a button gets clicked on internally, why can't jQuery could look at that thing that got clicked on, and it could say, hey, look, I'm going to look at this element that got clicked on. I'm going to look at this element. Is this element have, however it does it, does this element, I'm just looking at this one single thing. Does this element match? Is this element a button? Is this element a list item? Here's this function that's just an object. I'm going to call that function. When I call that function, I'm going to bind it with the context of this button. What's the iterating? You could write this yourself.
I just wonder if, so once you click that thing, if you looked underneath, would there be event listeners on every single, I bet you there would be.
No.
No?
You guys breaking my chops today. What
No,
is
no,
this?
no.
Is there a camera back here?
I just feel like it would just, once you do that, it just goes like this. I'm gonna take this whole list and I'm gonna update it with the event.
Hey, you know what? I got a good idea. I got a good idea. Look at the annotated source code and see what it does.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right, we're almost done. I've only got 50 more slides.
When you wrap that HTML list item in the dollar sign, that's another use of the dollar sign, right?
That's another use. So basically, we have 4 ways dollar sign is being used: selectors,
Right.
casting, creating. All of those create a wrap set. The last one, where you're passing in a function, to me seems like which one of these things is not like the other. Basically, I don't know exactly what you'd be wrapping in that case. It's a function, right? But that's basically how you would code to execute when the dollar.
Way of telling whether you're selecting or creating if you give it a string.
It looks at the string and it sees, you know, I imagine if the string is, there's some way that it validates valid HTML. If you put in invalid HTML, it probably would break and say, I can't do this.
So it has to be an HTML.
It's got to be an HTML fragment. And it's parsing it.
Right.
Under the, behind the scenes, it's parsing it. It's probably making sure it's valid too. If you just gave, you know, tags that weren't nested properly, I bet you would end up blowing up and saying, this is not a valid HTML fragment.
So you couldn't select using that same syntax.
No, you can't, but, and it probably wouldn't be a valid selector anyway.
Well, it might just think it's a selector if it's not valid HTML. And then not find anything.
I have a feeling if you start with the less than, I think it's going to be a little bit of a problem. So let's finally get to this recap slide. So client-side library, and what you're using it for is DOM selection, event handling, you're managing your element properties, and this is something that I had spoken about earlier. And you're going to see this with the workshop, is that it's still used a lot, but it has really no opinion in terms of setting up applications. It does something very good. It's very, very good at manipulating the DOM. And so, you know, in terms of structuring your code for a single page application, it's got no opinion. And so if you just use jQuery for a single page application, which you can do, which we're doing, you'll find that it's very easy for things to sort of spiral out of control pretty quickly. And that's a result of that is probably how some of these frameworks ended up coming into being. So let me kill this and delete this video.
Just delete the audio.
Oh, by the way, we'll save these slides as well.
Oh yeah, you're uploading